Hey everybody, welcome back to Backlog Banter. I'm your boy Abram, joined as usual by Tucker Hazel, and we're here today to review Kena Bridge of Spirits. But before we do, if you want to tell us your thoughts on Kena or anything else at all, be sure to join our Discord link as usual, top of the description all the way down there. Like the video, ring the bell, subscribe to the channel. You know what to do.
Yeah.
What we know what to do is talk to you
Yeah.
about Kena Bridge of Spirits. Now, Tucker,
Yes.
PS4, PS5, PC.
True. We had a previously recorded
Yes.
intro where I thought it was a PS5 exclusive. I don't know
Yes.
why I assumed that, but it certainly has been pushed as one of the premier titles from not PlayStation Studios, but related to PlayStation games in all of their
Sure.
recent conferences. I believe it was at the PS5 sort of games reveal initially, alongside some other stuff.
Probably.
But I was very excited for this game because
Yeah.
it seemed not necessarily different, but different in scope from a different team. It had
Definitely.
an interesting air about it. And from its first reveal, I was like, okay, this could be cool.
It definitely has a different flavor than the other games in the PlayStation ecosystem.
Yeah.
I would say that it doesn't really have a unique flavor at all,
Yeah.
as we'll get into.
Mhm.
And so to give my high-level impressions, I think that this is done by a studio called Ember Lab. Ember Lab, it would be most...
My impression is that it's made by this team.
Yes. People in our community might know Ember Lab for their Majora's Mask fan film called Terrible Fate, which is how I learned about them back around 2016. But this is their first game.
Yeah.
So through the lens of this being this team's first game, it's fucking incredible. I mean, the game is it's beautiful. It's a really hot in contextual, but big in scope for your first game. A
100%.
huge third-person action adventure like this.
Yeah.
It's incredibly impressive. But that said, to me, I think Kena just feels like a bunch of other people's ideas put in the framework of what frankly kind of feels like a generic fantasy world. And
Yeah.
while the game is fun to play, and it is I think the right length, good, solid mechanics, it's not a whole lot more than that to me.
Yeah, I mean, it hits the notes of
Right.
a game, an action adventure exploration game
Yes.
from anywhere past the GameCube era, PS2 era.
Yeah.
We've gotten a lot of games like this, and the things that make it stand apart are the fact that being made by such a small team, it has visuals on the level of the major studios. It's impressive
Beyond that level.
how
Game's
solid
beautiful.
and amazing the visuals of the world design are. The
Yeah.
textures, the animations are amazing, and the cutscenes are even higher quality. This is not a joke. It sounds like a fake story, but I would be sitting there playing Kena, and my roommate Tanner would come bumbling down the stairs on a trip and falling, who knows what he's up to, and he would look at the TV, and for some reason, almost every time he came down the stairs, a cutscene was on, and he would audibly go, "Ooh, that looks great!" And he's like, "Man, this
Yeah.
is kind of like Toy Story 4 levels of just quality animation with like realistic lighting engines and all sorts of stuff." And he's right; they are very impressive.
Yes.
The transitions to the cutscenes feel a little bit outdated in terms of we're used to now things like God of War, like Last of Us 2 transition very smoothly from cutscenes to
still pretty good.
gameplay. But
Yeah.
on the whole, visually, this game is absolutely stunning. And you would not be remiss to look at a few screenshots of this game or a few clips of gameplay and be like, wow, this is probably from one of the premier PlayStation studios.
No, I agree completely. But beyond that, well, actually, let's stick with the aesthetic for a second, because the game is technically beautiful, but the art direction for me doesn't always work.
Sure.
I think that as you play more Kena, the game gets better in pretty much every respect. I think that it becomes far more interesting, and that includes on a visual level, because I feel like a lot of the game, frankly, feels like stock standard fantasy fare. It's here's the mystical forest, and then here are the kind of spooky caves, right? And then here's the big plains with the blacksmith smithy and all these buildings and towers and everything. It feels very archetypal, which is not necessarily
100%.
a problem, but I just think that it contributes to this feeling of Kena's a game you've played before.
Yes, 100%. I think that I'm much higher on the aesthetic and world and all of that, because I do think that it is all really well laid out. I love the architecture of the villages, and the trees are towering and look great, and there's all sorts of rich detail in these environments, and I really had a great time exploring them, even if from a uniqueness perspective, it's not nothing to stand on incredibly on its own. You look at a forest, you're like, Yeah, a magical forest
Yes.
in a magical world. And I do wish there had been some other twist in terms of, maybe leaves being slightly different color, or
Something like that would have helped.
a more cohesive set of characters that feel or enemies and things of that nature that feel like their own world. On the whole, everything looks good and serves its purpose, but it really is lacking that spark of originality.
No, I agree, and I think that in broad strokes, the narrative brings that, because I think when it, and I don't really want to spoil it, frankly, but when it kind of clicks what Kana does and who the characters around her are, not on an individual level, but like what they are, I suppose I'd say, in a non-spoilery way, is very interesting. But the problem, as we both discussed before we started this review, is that you just don't care. And it sounds kind of callous, but you just don't, because the game never makes you care. They never establish characters or locations or ideas in a way that makes you want to empathize with the characters when you go through what is supposed to be a very emotionally charged narrative.
I certainly agree. I think what this game is lacking is setup. You go straight into this world. Kana barely introduces herself, and you're thrown snowballing right into, okay, she's got the rot, and you're meeting these kids, and there's an old man who's wise, and everyone else in the village is gone, and there's not any connection to what this world was before, who Kana is in relation to these people, where she's from, what her history is like. You get small drip feeds through the cutscenes throughout the game, but it feels disjointed, especially because there's very little in terms of environmental storytelling. You are either exploring the world or learning about the world in cutscenes. There's not a lot of engaging with an element like, oh, okay, this is that area that I know about, that I've been hearing about, stuff like that. It's like, yeah, there's the village and the mountain shrine, but that's really the only locations in the game that feel lore interesting or connected. And while I do think the characters that you meet along the way are solid in their own right in terms of having their own mini stories that each sort of section of the game focuses on, they don't interconnect in any way. There isn't a feeling of cohesion that these people knew one another, that they all come from a same area, that this really terrible thing that caused the village to become abandoned and most people to die. I don't know. It just feels a little disjointed because there is such a disconnect from world and cutscene where you're learning about it.
Yeah, I think that disconnect kind of goes across every scale, because this is supposed to be really a personal narrative about Kana and her relationship to people. That's really what the story is. But as you're saying, it's told in almost this episodic structure.
Yes.
That is very much segmented, even just in the context of the map and the world. There's three very distinct places you visit.
Yes.
To track the story. And even though you return to the central village, as you're saying, with a lack of environmental storytelling, there's a lack of interactivity to the world.
I agree.
Period. Because this is in part a platformer, in part. But this is a world that is confined by invisible walls.
Yes,
and platforms where you're very clearly supposed to be able to jump to or not. And because of that, the beauty of the world, I just think, sits on top of a game that doesn't service that.
Yeah, it's interesting when you contextualize this game around being an action platform, a 3D action platform, essentially. I do think there is a very big gap in terms of engagement and quality in the straight up platforming, where you are doing Uncharted 1 style of jumping up walls and stuff, which, okay, yeah, we've seen that before. We've done it in Uncharted. It's not a huge problem in Uncharted, but I kind of want to get away from that now that I've done it in 5 Uncharted games. Or just jumping physically from platform to platform, because I think Kana's jump is a little bit too, like, shallow. She does a really weird spin double jump that doesn't have enough length to it, I feel. But what I do think the game does shine is in the puzzle platforming elements.
Definitely.
Where you are using this amazing mechanic of shooting the bow at a flower that zips you to it like a grappling hook. You have these bombs that end up shifting platforms into the air on a timer. There's a lot of interesting mechanics that are fun to combine and learn to use to traverse the world and explore further, but they're placed on top of just, okay, we've seen this before, physics and platforming like elements.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think this game really snowballs in a good way.
Yeah.
As you start to unlock new tools in Kana's arsenal, the level design becomes much more interesting as a result.
Yeah.
And platforming becomes elevated because it is very simple. And it's a little bit too simple in some respects. So there is the very clearly telegraphed, here's the edge you can hop on like in Uncharted platforming. But that is scripted. So when you are just jumping between platforms and you hit an edge and you just roll off the front of it, there's no attention to that grabbing mechanic being anything other than a set piece, right? And so because of that, I think we really have to rely on the game's interesting ideas to buoy what are very simple mechanics that fall into very distinct buckets. But the problem is I think those good ideas just come too late.
Yeah, I heard a lot of people talking about how the early hours of this game weren't very interesting to them. And I can certainly see that because I do think it gets a lot more mechanically and visually and story-wise interesting as you go. The first few hours are much more basic, but I didn't feel the drain that I've heard a lot of people talking about with the first few hours of this game. I maybe coming from something like Souls games like Bloodborne, where you're using light attack and heavy attack for the combo on the bumper and trigger, and you have your parry, and you're using these magic attacks, quote unquote. I was pretty engaged by the combat, and I was finding it interesting to want to explore the world, even to a minor degree, to find I think they're called karma points, which let you upgrade your moveset and get more rot, which I thought was sort of like Korok seeds, fun to find.
Sure.
So I didn't really feel the drag on those first few hours, but I will admit they certainly are a lot more basic than what you get to eventually.
Yeah, I don't think they drag, especially because the game is not long. Game, you can beat it within 6 to 8 hours easily.
Yeah, I think I was around 8.5 or something at my finished play clock.
Yeah, and honestly, I think that's the right length
100%.
for this game. I don't think that it has the complexity to sustain a longer runtime than
It doesn't overstay its welcome, and it doesn't feel like they drag out mechanics too much. You can beat one of its areas where it introduces you to a mechanic in 2.5 hours, and that feels like a really perfect length in terms of its pacing.
No, I agree, and I think it actually speaks to some pretty smart design on Ember Lab's behalf to be able to introduce this concept and then move on to implementing the concept and then combining it with the next mechanic.
Yeah.
And by the end, by the time that you're using the bow and you're using the bombs and you're using the dash, there's a really great convergence there. But I just think that might come too late to be truly engaging.
Yeah, I guess I can see that. I think what proved to me that this game does have great design, even if it is sort of mished in with things that we've seen before, is the best compliment that I can give to a action platformer or an action game such as this is when that moveset really becomes second nature. By the end of the game, the last few sections of the game, I knew exactly what all the buttons did. I felt like I could string them together in combat and in exploration and in the environments. And I was like, oh, okay, all right, I need the bow there. I need the bombs to go there, and I need to slow down time. I need to use my rot hammer and send the rot to do all this stuff. And it really felt natural because it was so the progression was so naturally introduced throughout the game.
Yeah, and I think the combat is where that kind of shines the best, because I think the combat is the strongest part of this game.
I agree, yeah.
But I think the combat is... Did you play on easy?
No, I played on normal.
So I played on normal for probably 85% of the game.
That's where I was about to go as well.
Yeah, and there's a couple bosses that I flipped it down to easy for. And the reason being is because the bosses hit too hard. And
oh god,
Kana does not have enough invincibility frames.
Yeah, so and there's very little in terms of healing items in the environment. When you're in a boss arena, you have maximum 2 things that fill up your health 75% of the way.
Yeah, and I don't necessarily have a problem with that, except for when you literally will have your entire health bar burned by one sequence from a boss, because you'll get hit, you'll get caught in it, you'll get hit twice, maybe 3 times before you can get back up and react. So that was a problem of tuning, and it's also a problem of difficulty balancing, because if you go down to the disparity between easy and normal is so fucking huge.
There's a gulf there. Yeah, you'll get your ass handed to by a boss, and you're like, oh my god, they're doing all these crazy attacks, and they're stringing together combos, and they're doing this moves where they jump up in the air and magnetize towards you. Like, oh shit. But then you knock it down to easy, and I would have times where I would be like, No, actually, I kind of want to get it back up to normal because I feel like I know what's going on. So I'm gonna wait and let them kill me so I can restart and turn back up to normal. And the enemies would just stand there,
Right?
Because I'm on story mode, which is what they call easy mode, and they would just be like strafing back and forth, not attacking me. And I'm like, oh, okay, wow, there really is a difference. And I do think that there should have been a middle ground. One where it does fight back, but doesn't require such precise timing and skill. So you don't have to take it down to easy where you can knock down the boss in one try with just a few hits.
Yeah, I think because the thing about easy mode is it's not just weaker AI and less damage, more damage on Kana's behalf. It's also your rot charges, so you can do special moves faster, passively, and all kinds of things. So if there had just been a middle ground there where your rot's not passively charging, the enemy AI is the same, but they're just not hitting you for as much, that would be better because the bosses are really well designed.
Yes.
They've got great concepts for each of the fights, but it's very tiresome, especially if there's like 3 major bosses in the game and a bunch of mini bosses.
Yeah,
the major
bosses, of mini bosses,
which are great, but the major bosses just fuck you up immediately, and because of that, it just feels really tiresome. I literally spent 45 minutes on the what is it called, like the Twisted Tarot fight or whatever.
Oh, sure, the first boss, corrupted. Yeah.
And because of that, I just didn't really have the interest to do that same thing for the warden or the woodsman or whatever the fuck his name is in the last one.
Yeah, no, I think that the problem with the bosses and all and the combat and all that is that gulf between normal and easy and the difficulty spikes.
Yeah.
Because within their visual design, conceptual design, attack design, attack patterns, you using your combat against them having unique mechanics that you have to deal with and adapt to within the battles. This game is amazing in terms of that design. There are a ton of mini bosses, and they're all pretty different, and they all allow you to use your moveset in different ways. And I had a great time just stumbling into a boss, and you're like, no idea what's going to come next. And it always felt like something fresh, and the combat is really epic and fast-paced, and it does become engaging when you are in that flow, but then you hit a wall, and you're like, damn, I really wish there was just a little bit less so I could progress and didn't have to feel like I had to be a god tier at this game.
Yeah, but on the whole, when it is good, it's really great combat wise. When you're using all your different powers, you're doing the Breath of the Wild time slowdown as you're knocking an arrow, and you're using your bombs, you're rolling about, comboing your hits, you're upgrading your arsenal using the rod. It's really dynamic in a way that I didn't quite expect based on where we began in terms of combat complexity early on.
Which is just light attacks and heavy attacks and using your rod to slow a guy down, which is an interesting mechanic and can be very useful. But at the beginning of the game, I didn't find myself using that at all because the enemies are very simple, and you also only have like 2 per battle because they fill up pretty slowly on normal mode. So by the end of the game, once you have everything snowballed together, as you were saying with the combat, it does become a lot more dynamic and interesting.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, Tucker, I'm not sure how much more else I have to say about Kana.
Yeah. A couple other things to mention. I think the soundtrack is good, but not super memorable. I think there's 1 or 2 tracks that I found myself humming along to. The village theme, I think it's great. It's got this nice little flute to it. It's very relaxing. But it does end up just feeling like, okay, yeah, this is pounding music for battle, but not like iconic pounding music for battle.
No, I agree. I think in the context of the game, as you're playing with your headphones in, you're in that world, the soundtrack sounds really good. But removed from that, I can't really remember the music. So take that for what you will.
Yeah. One thing about the combat that I do think should have been tweaked is the lock-on. You click in your left stick to lock onto an enemy, but it's really finicky. You have to be like exactly on them, and it disappears sometimes for no fucking reason. But when you're coming, I know, me playing Bloodborne, coming off of Bloodborne, where that lock-on is integral to how you approach each enemy and very precise in how you know exactly who you want to target, and it stays on them no matter what until you switch it. I just felt like, oh, this is a little bit gummy. It's a little bit slippery. I really wish I could focus my attacks a little better, because when a boss goes boom and shoots onto the other side of the arena, you have to entirely reorient yourself in a way that can sometimes make it so you're turning around and they're just on your ass already.
Yeah, I think a lot of the issues with this game just speak to the fact that Ember Lab is making their first game.
100%.
And so That's why, on the whole, I did enjoy my time with Kena. I have a lot of issues with it. I reviewed it at Retro where I gave it a 6, and I personally think that's fair. I think it's an okay game when all of the parts of its whole are stuck together. But what I take away from this is that whatever Ember Lab does next is going to be truly special because they have an aptitude for design and fidelity that a lot of incredibly experienced teams don't have.
Yes.
So if they can take what worked in Kena and apply a more unique identity to it, or be given someone else's IP and just kind of clean up these mechanical rough edges, I think they're going to be a name in the industry.
I certainly agree. I think what most comes down to my perspective on this game is that almost every aspect of it, except for the visual fidelity and I think the combat in places, is like 70% there. Like you can see the charm and quality and polish shining through, but it's under this layer of, the combat at the beginning is pretty basic. You're just using these light and heavy attacks. You're using Uncharted 1 style climbing things. Right. The exploration, one thing we didn't touch on is the collectibles, which the rot is fine because it upgrades you. The the karma points are fine because they upgrade you, but the majority of your exploration is rewarded with these little blue crystals, which basically do fuck all because all they do is give you hats for your rot, which is useless. It's just an aesthetic thing, or you're finding a new hat for your rot, which you have to then go buy with these blue things. So the exploration is not particularly incentivized with like interesting collectibles, which I think is a problem, and it just feels like that could have been given a little bit more tweak to make that. So I really wanted to 100% everything. I really wanted to explore each nook and cranny in the environment because the environments are fun to explore. But when I'm 2/3 of the way through the game and I realize, 70% of the time I'm just finding these dumb blue crystals that I already have 10,000 of, I don't really care to explore more because I know I'm not going to get rewarded with anything super meaningful. But it being 70% of the way there for a first game is very impressive. I would come down on this game at a 7 out of 10 because I do think that when you break down each of its aspects, it shines a lot more than it does not. And it being a first game, it is incredibly impressive that we're even considering it visually, mechanically, to be one of the premier PlayStation titles of this year. So, I would give it a 7 out of 10, 70% of the way there, and I think that kind of solidifies my thoughts.
Well, good. Tucker, we'll be back in 7 years to talk about Ember Lab's next game.
Yeah, it's gonna take a while.
I bet we'll have some backlog banter videos between now and then.
At least 3.
I would hope that that's like one every 18 months or so. So I think we can swing that. But no, we've got plenty more reviews planned in the short term. Monkey Ball, Metroid Dread. I'm sure we've got some retro Metroid reviews in the pipeline. But there's going to be plenty of great content, so make sure you subscribe for reviews and discussions, movies, fucking politics.
Movies.
We're actually a big political channel.
BLB is changing.
Yes, and we're going to talk about balancing the budget next episode of the show. But Tucker, I think that's about it for us today.
Yes, it is.
We'll be back, or not, but we will be. Or maybe we won't.
You keep them on edge.
Maybe we will.